I'd like to introduce our next speaker. So our next speaker is Kate Maniti, who is a PhD student in classical archaeology at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver. Her main research concerns Egyptian and Egyptianizing artifacts in archaic Sicily and Mediterranean connections, but she is also very much interested in the portrayal of antiquity in video games and its evolution.
Thank you. I apologize in advance for the bad audio, but I am not in my apartment, so everything is a little, bouncing back. So let's start. All right. So the portrayal of Egypt in popular culture is something that has always interested me. And since I started gaming a few decades ago, I've noted some patterns repeating in video games dealing with ancient Egypt. So in this talk, I will try to briefly address some concerns that I have as an archaeologist and as a gamer, and some patterns that I have noticed. So first of all, we need to dispel the myth that the portrayal of Egypt as a weird and monstrous place is a new thing. It is actually a fairly ancient tradition. We have ancient Greek historians and Roman poets, from Herodotus to Diodorus, Virgil, and Horace, repeatedly addressing the fact that Egypt has weird animal-headed gods and goddesses and monstrous creatures. Now, not all of them use the word monstrum in a negative way, but the insistence on the weird deities is definitely something that is already there in antiquity. This fascination proceeds throughout the centuries. So in the Middle Ages, there's a fascination with Egyptian beasts in illuminated codes and other things. We can see at the top left a phoenix dying and then being born again, a crocodile on the bottom left. Then from the 16th, 17th century to the 19th, the theme becomes more curses, magic, the magic and occult powers of Egypt. And we can see this in some opera backgrounds, actually from the Magic Flute, the history of Sethos, which is an initiation tale of an Egyptian prince, and tarot cards. And then from the 20th century onwards, we finally get to 1932 masterpiece, The Mummy with Boris Karloff, in which we see the first full-fledged Egyptian monster on screen in what can at this point be defined popular culture. So when we talk about games, we need to see just how many monsters are present in games. So there are, up to this day, roughly 200 games set in ancient Egypt. 62 of them have monsters. However, if we take away from these 198 all the games that are like fighting games like Tekken or Street Fighter, or racing games, they only have one level set in Egypt, we have 62 out of 125. Out of any 2 games set in Egypt, one of them will have monsters. And this is not true for other civilizations. If you get a video game dealing with ancient Greece or ancient Rome, you are probably not going to get 50% of them having monsters in them and straight away on the cover. So that is something to keep in mind as we go forward. So archaeogaming, not a new thing also. Egyptian monsters have been there from the very get-go. In 1985, we have 2 of the first popular video games, Kings Valley and Entombed, which are on Commodore 64 and on the MSX. And we already see at the very get-go of video games, mummies in Egyptian tombs from the start. And you can see the mummies here on the right. They're not very attractive mummies and very full-fledged, like 8 bits, but they are still mummies. They're still monstrous, and they are clearly antagonists. And this is the first problem, because where do we get this idea of a mummy, which is a human remain, as an antagonist? For this presentation, I've decided to take some of the most popular games. And by popular, I mean they have sold more than 1 million copies worldwide. I've taken 2 for the 1990s decades, which is when I started gaming, 2 for the 2000 decades, and then the latest one, which is Assassin's Creed Origin from 2017. Now, the 2 that have sold fewer copies is not because they are less popular, it's because they are computer games. And when games do not come out on consoles, many times they will sell fewer copies than the others. But we have Tomb Raider, The Last Revelation, Imperium 3, which is a strategic game that has some weird monsters, which I will show, Age of Mythology, and Assassin's Creed Origins. So what kind of monsters are we dealing with? The monsters that we find in video games can be put on a sort of spectrum, from straight out of the Egyptian pantheon to how did they even think of that? So straight out of the Egyptian pantheon, we have some actual demons from antiquity. We have the snake Apep, which is the monstrous snake that every night tries to eat the sun god Ra as he's traveling through the underworld, and the eater of soul, the demon Amit or Ammut. And yet, these are the 2 creatures that we find the less often in video games. And these are actually scary monsters for Egyptians, but for some reasons, they don't sell. Then we have a plethora of more or less Egyptian-inspired monsters. We have animal-headed guardians, think jackal-headed, falcon-headed, scarab-headed, snakes, a lot of snakes, sometimes with wings, sometimes not, sphinxes, giant scarabs, great classic, mummies, again, are they monsters? Do they qualify as monsters? Apparently they sell if you sell them as monsters. Human-scorpion hybrids, laser crocodiles, my absolute favorite. And then we have some things that are not Egyptian at all, including ghoul priests with demonic powers. And I can hear, the echo of 17th century European explorers going through Egypt. Carnivorous beetles, no record whatsoever. And the so-called guardian from Tomb Raider 4, which has some Egyptian iconographies to it, but it's not actually Egyptian at all. So straight, out of the bat, the most popular one is the mummy. We have mummies in most games. If you have a game that is set in Egypt, somehow, some way, there's going to be a mummy. You find a mummy, you have to face a mummy, you have to fight them, you have to go through them. There are always mummies. Then we have animals, so scarabs and snakes. We have Anubis, which are jackal-headed guardians. And then we have all the rest of them. But once again, let us keep in mind that mummies seem to be the most popular. So let's start from, straight out of the pantheon. This is the serpent Apep. On the top right, of course, it's how it appears in Egyptian papyri. He's a snake. He's a giant snake. He gets killed by this beautiful cat or sort of hare, which is the sun god. And this is how it appears, finally, in Assassin's Creed Origin. A giant snake, which you have to defeat with a solar bow. So this is actually pretty close to the original. And I was very surprised when I had to face it and then seeing his remains, his skeletal remains at the bottom right. Another one that is very faithful is the Devourer, Amit, which is on the top left. It's only found in passing in one game and you don't have to find it, but this was actually one of the most terrifying monsters of ancient Egypt. And yet, it's never in video games. The other one, which is the most popular in any sort of media, is Anubis. Anubis is the jackal-headed god of mummification. He's not a warrior, he's not a fighter, and yet invariably in video games you will find armed Anubis or his warriors. And it is something to think about. Where does this idea of like a fighting jackal-headed warrior will come from? These sort of creatures. These are the guardians of the gates. So in ancient Egyptian religion, when one dies, one has to undergo a journey to get to the underworld. And on this journey, there are guardians that guard the gates of the underworld, and one has to face them. not fight them, just answer questions. But many of these we find in video games because all these guardians have animal heads and they are armed. So it is plausible that many of these ideas could have come from here. And they have all sorts of animal heads. We can see, a jackal, so probably not Anubis, but this kind of jackal-headed things, a ram, a cat, 2 snakes, a falcon, a lion, all sorts of animals that would be predators and that would, guard the afterward. Now, moving forward, we have snakes and scorpions. Now, the deal with snakes and scorpions is slightly different because Egyptians did fear snakes and scorpions, and we have representation of giant snakes spitting fire against the enemies. But you are not supposed to face these giant snakes, right? These giant snakes in Egyptian mythology are fighting against adversaries. And a snake is literally on the forehead of Pharaoh, spitting fire against his enemies and the enemies of Egypt. And the goddess Selket, who is a scorpion, is actually a protective goddess. So, and there's no mention of giant scorpions. And yet we find giant scorpions because arachnids are scary, apparently. It is rare to find any game set in Egypt that doesn't at least have you kill some scorpions or some snakes. Although I have to point out that the winged snakes are mentioned by Herodotus himself. So he invented that somehow. And then we have beetles, scarabs. Now the scarab is absolutely baffling from an Egyptological perspective because Khepri, who is it's a dung beetle, he's the representation of the sun god being rolled out after the end of his journey every morning. So the beetle is not, whoop, sorry about that. What's going on? Okay. The beetle is not a negative figure anywhere in Egypt. If you have a giant beetle, 100% that is the sun god, or if you have a person with a beetle head, that is the god Khepri. And yet, once again, just for the scorpions, bugs are scary somehow, beetles are squeamish, and so giant beetles will not be weird in Egyptian-related video games because Egypt is so intrinsically related to beetles and scarabs that somehow it makes sense to have them as monsters in something that is set in Egypt. And then we have mummies, not only human mummies, but also animal mummies. And this is something that we cannot escape from. We have them in Tomb Raider, we have them in the review of Tomb Raider, we have them in Age of Mythology, we have them even in Assassin's Creed Origins, although these are royal mummies being waken up by a curse. But once again, mummies and curses go together. So there is clearly something, obscure and arcane about these mummified remains, which is kind of problematic because these would not have been scary for ancient Egyptians. You would not be scared of your mummified grandma, I would hope. And then my absolute favorite, the laser crocodile. This is a weird one. The laser crocodile is found in Age of Mythology. Now, the name that is given is Petsukos, which is the Greek transliteration of the Egyptian name Padis Sobek, which indicated the sacred crocodile of Sobek found in what the Greeks call Crocodilopolis. This was a normal, more or less, crocodile that was fed and apparently covered in jewels by the priests of Sobek. Now, in Age of Mythology, it was decided to give him a sun disk on his forehead that becomes a burning glass. This idea, iconographically speaking, is taken from ancient Egypt because Sobek is a solar deity, and so he is represented with a sun disk over his head. But it is a sun disk, it is not a burning glass. So this is the best example of a pastiche that unites Egyptian mythology and Archimedes' inventions to make like a sort of monster that is more efficient in a gaming way, but also weird and not found in the Egyptian pantheon. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have ghoul priests, so priests that possess demonic powers and can, turn themselves into clouds of plagues, or can turn themselves into ghouls and mummies, again, the mummies, which are found in Imperium. We have the famous, or should I say infamous, carnivorous scarabs that we find not only in Tomb Raider, The Last Revelation, but also in many movies, and everyone who has watched The Mummy would know. And then this weird-looking kind of dinosaur-type monster, which is inside the tomb in Tomb Raider, The Last Revelation. This is a dinosaur. This is not an Egyptian monster. But if you look at his neck, the stripes are reminiscent of Tutankhamun's mask and of the horizontal stripes on the Nemes headdress. So this is clearly Egyptian inspired. It looks Egyptian, but it's not. How did we get there? So what? So the first thing that I noticed, and I'm not trying to, call myself an authority, but I've been playing video games for some 25 years now. So I've noticed some patterns, especially after I got into archaeology. The first one is that there is a serious lack of creatures that ancient Egyptians actually feared. If you look at the Eater of Souls, the Devourer is made of hippo, lion, and crocodile. We have seen half a crocodile, we have seen no hippos, and we have seen no lions. So this begs the question, whose fears are these monsters mirroring? Because this is really not ancient Egyptian fears. This sounds suspiciously like 18th, 19th century and 20th century European fears. Then again, there is the problem of seeing mummies as monsters. It is cheap. It was probably fine in 1932, but in 2020, I find it a little reductive, if not straightforward problematic, to see human remains as a scare tactic. Then, from a gaming perspective, there's the horde problem. If you are bombarded with monsters, you don't care about them. You just want to get through them and kill all of them. But this is also the opposite issue. Better monsters do not make for a better context and a more compelling story. The reason why Assassin's Creed Origins does it well with Apep is because you have to fight this giant snake once. It is a difficult fight, and it is in a dream in which the protagonist is actually mirroring the travel of the sun god in the underworld to come forth by day. So is this Orientalism? It is difficult to not believe that this is all steeped in Orientalism. And yet, there are some encouraging trends. Newer video games have fewer mummies and a larger plethora of different creatures, paired with, and thank goodness, more compelling storylines. So as an archaeologist and as a gamer, I can only applaud this, and I do hope that we can, move forward from jackal-headed guardians and angry mummies and towards the actual scary demons and guardians that are so beautifully described in ancient Egyptian art. Thank you.